Ladies and gentlemen, we still look pretty good from a distance, don't you think? A planet with the capacity to accommodate humans and animals in mutual harmony. And yet, some of the super rich, such as Elon Musk from Tesla, dream of building a new civilization on Mars. Mars, a barren place. People constantly look or searching for new forms of life on other planets. The possibility of water being on Mars sends scientists into ecstasy, while at the same time, higher forms of life on our own planet, which hardly differ from humans genetically, are only neglected or given selective attention. Why is it that cats and dogs are cherished, while the more intelligent pig is debased and abused? There are great inconsistencies in the way we treat other living beings and our living environment. I would like to invite you to imagine for one moment that we have discovered beings on Mars with the same intellectual capacity as pigs. Would we then subjugate them and use them for our own ends? Would we domesticate these Martians and put them in large-scale stalls so we could fatten them up and kill them? What right would we have to do this? And moreover, what would this say about our level of civilization and development? Which criteria should we use to assess other possible inhabitants of the universe? And how should we determine whether they should be allowed to live and be autonomous? And the question is, would we, Earthlings, find it right if we ourselves were to be judged in this way by beings with a higher intelligence? Is it not, ladies and gentlemen, high time to make new agreements about how living beings should be treated on our own planet? And should the old adage, do unto others as they should do unto you, not be the guiding principle for this? Homo sapiens are the only species that threatens the very survival of the Earth. Humans regard themselves as the embodiment of the highest developed form of intelligence, the very top of the pyramid of civilization. However, this conveniently ignores the fact that wherever human beings go, major problems emerge. And someone said to me, you know, in a world without humans, there wouldn't be any crises. Crises like climate change, biodiversity crisis, scarcity of drinking water, energy crisis, food crisis. The list goes on and on. And Gandhi was once asked what he thought of Western civilization. And he said he thought it would be a really good idea. A civilization that protects the interests of the weakest from the assumed rights of the strongest. And yet, we still haven't been able to manage it. In the next 45 minutes, I would like to elaborate on the human emotions which lead to the use and abuse of the planet in general and of animals in particular. Emotions which prevent people, companies and governments phasing out the exploitation of animals. And then I'm going to tell you about the history and current political and strategic role of our party in the animal rights movement, and why this political approach stimulates not only the debate on animal rights and animal welfare, but is also a great opportunity to have animal rights acknowledged and ensure better legally binding animal welfare standards. The use of animals is closely related to our human emotions. And by that, I don't mean the emotions that some people may ascribe to animal protectionists, as if they want to knit a sweater for every pigeon they see. No, I mean the emotions that lead to the perfected system of destruction, called the factory farming industry. Emotions that lead to animal testing centers, recreational hunting, circuses to trade in exotic animals, and fur farms. And by being led by these emotions or sentiments, we have created a society that would make no human or non-human being happy in the long run. These emotions are certainly worth examining more closely. And I've chosen 5 arguments solely based on emotions rather than on the rationale that people use to justify the use of animals or even animal suffering, especially with regard to eating animals. The first emotion is animals taste so good. There are numerous reasons to stop eating animals. In short, it's better for your health, it's better for the planet, and it's obviously better for animals. But for many people, delicious is the emotion for justifying killing animals for our food. Unfortunately, it's the most frequently heard emotion for allowing animals to suffer all their lives, their entire lives, in order to satisfy people's desire to eat more meat. For other forms of antisocial behavior, the justification, but it tastes so good, is no longer acceptable. But it really wouldn't surprise me if sometime in a not too distant future, eating meat would be regarded as being antisocial, just as much as smoking is now in the company of non-smokers. In this day and age of advanced technology, it seems irrational, ridiculous even, to have valuable vegetable protein first go through the stomach and intestines of an animal, after which only 10% of useful proteins remains. We have the choice, at this moment, of using 1 kilo of soy either to produce 300 grams of chicken or to produce 3 kilos of meat substitute. We can feed the world if we produce less animal protein and by deciding to use more vegetable protein for direct human consumption. A parallel. Only a century ago, there were millions upon millions of cart horses in the United States, and of course also in Australia. Now, they are nearly extinct. Agricultural mechanization has led to more efficient ways of working the land than having a horse pull a plow. Similarly, we should also free animals bred for slaughter from the food chains. Our party pushed the Dutch government a few years ago to create a budget of 6 million euros for alternatives to animal protein. Some people, ladies and gentlemen, believe that the end of factory farming will damage the economy. Such arguments were also used against the abolition of slavery and child labor, as well as for not allowing women to work. But that's turned out just fine. That brings me to the second emotional argument for the exploitation of animals. Animals are not worth the high cost involved in their protection. It's about money. For example, whenever we combat animal diseases, we still employ the primitive stamping out method. A method where we exterminate not only all the sick animals, but also the animals that are healthy. We destroy the lives of millions of healthy animals in order to remove any route for the disease to spread. The cure we employ is far more deadly than disease would ever have been. Bird flu has been an ever-present danger, but with well-organized mixed operation on small family farms, we have always been able to let the disease run its course. But with the current dense populations of animals, we can no longer allow for this. And I've heard that in your country, these dense farms or these factory farms is really a booming business. So it threatens our health and the health of animals. It will increasingly be a great danger with densely packed cattle and cramped multi-level chicken farms. We sacrifice, ladies and gentlemen, animals on a large scale on the altar of the economy. We seem to be thinking, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die, as we cram our shopping trolley full of bargains. In most cases, meat is cheaper than cat food. An egg now costs as little as it did 60 years ago. We know rationally that it can't be possible, and it should not be the case. And yet, at no time do we wonder if anyone or anything is paying the price somewhere down the line, be it the farmer, the environment, the animals, and ultimately, even the consumer. It's also the emotion of apathy, and the egocentric way of thinking, which makes us close our eyes to the objective fact that the large-scale suffering and destruction of our own living environment is caused by our own personal lifestyle choices. Over the last few decades, sadly, the economy has become much more important than ecology and other living beings, which brings us to the third emotion, indifference. Live for the moment. Sustainability and long-term interest in consequences, these are all of no concern to the Homo economicus. We want to instantly satisfy our needs. We attach more importance to the cheapest food available than the production of quality food that takes into account animals, nature, the environment, and the future. This is actually difficult to understand. After all, when we buy a car, a smartphone, or a television, we only want the best, even if we have to scrimp and save for it. But when it comes to food, a product that has the greatest impact on us, that is literally of vital importance to us, that we allow inside our bodies, then we seem to be willing to eat anything without being too critical. The only criteria that seem to count is that it's cheap and it's tasty. When the World Wildlife Fund states that within 50 years we would need another planet Earth if we were to continue unchanged in our use of raw materials and current consumption pattern with a lot of meat, we simply shrug our shoulders. This emotion is indifference, and sometimes expressed in comments as, "But you only live once." What goes through your mind when someone tells you that they are vegetarian? Well, anyone who at some time or another has enjoyed a vegetarian meal while others at the table were eating meat is familiar with the emotion that sometimes arises amongst his dinner companions. They say, "You probably have difficulties with me eating meat, have you? Oh, but you wear leather shoes." I think it's just the feeling of uneasiness of meat eaters and the feeling that a vegetarian judged them without saying anything. Maybe it's the guilt of the meat eater that is being expressed here. Frequently heard cliches associated with these emotions are, "But where do all those animals go if we don't eat them?" Really? And what about all those ants that you trample to death in the woods? Or doesn't that plant feel terrible pain when you eat it? Seldom, ladies and gentlemen, do such comments arise from a genuine concern about the lot of the ant or plant. They usually come for the dire need to justify their own behavior by trying to act like an animal protectionist. Ladies and gentlemen, the next and fourth feeling that arises talking about the lot of animals, about animal welfare is, "Oh, please, I don't want to know." Oh, one doesn't want to know or have to know everything. We want people and ourselves to believe that sausages come from cows that actually enjoy helping produce food for humans. And drumsticks sounds a lot better than chicken legs. A major manufacturer of frozen food once came up with the novel idea in our country, Holland, to produce fish fingers in the shape of fish. But what do you think happened? It swiftly led to lower sales amongst the young consumers who objected to eating animals. That's why meat producers want to show as little as possible of the process that turns an animal into a conveniently, neatly packed, visual acceptable food, almost artificial. And why consumers prefer to look the other way when confronted with the origins of their meat and with their animal welfare problems thrust in front of them at mealtimes. And governments stubbornly maintain that they do not want to discourage eating certain foods such as meat, as the consumer should be responsible for this themselves. In my opinion, a highly deceptive argument, as the consumer is clearly not informed about what is actually happening in the dark, confined spaces of the factory farms. And also, because in our country, 70% of the animal produce produced is all actually exported abroad. So the consumer has no real influence on the food industry. The production methods and place of consumption are simply far removed from one another. Favorite dish? Ostrich steak with head still in the sand. Ladies and gentlemen, the fifth emotion, or rather form of fear, is if we give animals rights, it will be at the expense of people. The fear of empowering a population group to which you don't belong yourself has always existed. At the end of the 18th century, the English feminist Mary Wollstonecraft wrote the book A Vindication of the Rights of Women. And this book was parodied by Cambridge philosopher Thomas Taylor in his book A Vindication of the Rights of the Brute. And by brutes, Taylor meant animals. And he suggested that if you were to give women freedom and rights, then logically speaking, you should give animals rights as well. And as this would be totally ridiculous, it is beyond dispute that you should not want to give rights to women. A frequently heard argument about introducing rights for animals is that this may start an avalanche of nonsense. Animals would then be able to become heirs and consequently very wealthy, whilst having no idea either past or future. And before you knew it, the dog would be sitting at the head of the table and in charge of the family. Roger Scruton, a British very conservative philosopher, wrote a book about his fear for animal rights. If one looks at the cover of his book, one knows that he hasn't really got a clue what he's talking about. But perhaps it has something to do with this. I drink before, therefore I am. That's another book of his, but perhaps because he also likes to shoot foxes for fun. Many people find it difficult to imagine that animals are of value in themselves, separate from any use they may have for people, and that this value should be taken seriously. Many find this a frightening idea, a sort of species betrayal. These fears influence the rationality needed to think seriously about the rights of animals, and completely ignore the fact that newly born babies, people suffering from dementia or Down syndrome, or severely handicapped people also have rights that they cannot exercise themselves. We have long moved from the idea that rights can only be given to those that can demand or exercise them. Moreover, this has nothing to do with giving animals human rights. Animal rights, in fact, mean nothing more than human obligations. Animals, ladies and gentlemen, often possess characteristics that set them apart from people in a positive sense. They are often stronger, they have better sense of smell and hearing, respond more to their instincts, which makes their lifestyle more sustainable, and they're seldom excessive. It's not necessary to claim that animals are superior in order to recognize that we can learn a lot from them. In a world without humans, as I said, there would be no crises. And although there are so many rational arguments to change our attitude towards animals and to stop or minimize the use of animals, the emotional arguments seem to be of overriding importance. And that's amazing, don't you think? As a result of these emotions, the Netherlands has developed into a country with the densest population of cattle in the world, and into a country where millions of animals are hunted, mistreated and killed like live targets. Objects that are there purely for our amusement and to satisfy our greed. When you think of Holland, perhaps your mind conjures through thoughts of cows on lush green pastures, thoughts which are not dissimilar to this. However, this is the reality at this moment. Mega stalls. In the Netherlands, 1.5 million farm animals are slaughtered every day. 1.5 million. That's 500 million a year. And that's hard to believe, I know. In a country with a population of only 17 million, that's 120 farm animals per Dutch household. Every year, 2 million animals are killed by hunters and 600,000 animals are used in animal testing experiments. And besides that, the Netherlands plays €1 billion role in the international trade of exotic animals and the trade of pets. And it's no surprise that the Netherlands was the first country in the world to have a political party for the animals, as a response to all the mentioned emotions, because only rationality will ultimately prevail. But what about the existing political parties? Haven't they paid enough attention to animal welfare issues, to animal rights issues, nature and environment so far? Well, animal welfare is a side dish for the few traditional political parties who, according to their parties' manifestos, are willing to defend it. But it is a key anti-issue for those politicians who believe that animal welfare is high-priced nonsense. In 2002, the farmers' representatives of the governmental parties were keen to reverse all animal welfare measures from the last 20 years as swiftly as possible. They so-called animal-friendly parties, like the Greens in our country, just let it happen without any protest, real protest. And although our law states that animals are sentient beings with an inherent value, animals have become objects again, only intended to serve the appetite and the economic purpose of people and commerce. This is why the plan to set up a party for the animals was hatched in late 2002, after the fall of the government. And the idea was a party that would initially serve to remind the parliamentary parties about their good intentions. And we started with just 4 people and no budget. And after the Party for the Animals was founded, we received a huge number of enthusiastic phone calls. I recall a woman who was very moved, a lady, telling me how wonderful she thought it was that at the age of 90, she was to see an actual party for animals. She herself had been active in a women's emancipation movement in the 60s and could still vividly remember how she and her fellow activists gave a toast to women's rights and vegetarianism. They felt a bond with all groups, be it man or animal, that were and still are oppressed. Ladies and gentlemen, I am sure you can imagine that the majority of the people mocked us for starting a party for the animals. They made fun of us. They couldn't believe their ears when they heard of our existence. What's next? A party for bicycles? A party for plants? Didn't we know we were the laughingstock of the country and we were never going to make it into parliament? I think, ladies and gentlemen, it has something to do with the fear or belief that a party for the animals automatically betrays humans or threatens the social and economic order. The very same fears that abolitionists encountered during their fight against slavery all feminists encountered and still encounter in their struggle for women's rights. But there were also people like feminists, famous authors, intellectuals and opinion leaders who saw us as the next emancipation movement. After the liberation of slaves, women, giving rights to children, the next logical step was to consider the interest of animals seriously, to look beyond the interest of our own species. And all these emotions of anger and hope and disbelief and sarcasm are very useful, I can assure you. It takes emotions to start a debate, to move people, to achieve social change. All other social movements were first ignored, then ridiculed, even criminalized. But in the end, they won. And it immediately became evident that our strategy worked when we participated in the elections of January 2003. We got a lot of free publicity, and overnight, other parties adopted animal welfare as an issue in their election programs and communications. Many other parties jumped on the bandwagon, and they started to do more for animals as a result of our role as a pacer or pace setter in a marathon. They realized that animal rights were becoming an increasingly important issue for the electorate. And some political analysts said that they were convinced that we weren't just a flash in a pan or a publicity stunt that got out of hand. They called our party a new political movement, the only exponent of new politics. And at that time, and still now, and I presume, probably, I guess it's also in your country, people were and are really fed up with politics, with traditional politics, fossil politics, and do not trust any politician. The Party for the Animals has attracted not only people who care about animals, but also people who have wanted to protest against the political establishment. Through the media, increasing numbers of Dutch celebrities have shared their sympathies for the Party for the Animals. But of course, we had to write a manifesto that, besides the animal issues, also had to reflect about viewpoints regarding healthcare, foreign affairs, education, etc., pensions. And we decided to be brief on these issues in our first manifesto. 90% of the pages were about animal issues because, let's face it, more than 90% of the election programs of other parties were addressing human issues. Short-term human interest, that is to say. Real one-issue parties, I would say. It was quite extraordinary and surprising to see that when we went through these other issues, we jointly arrived at the same viewpoints at no time at all. In the years that followed, we developed 4 main principles as a framework to develop viewpoints: compassion, sustainability, personal freedom, and personal responsibility. And when I met people from the Spanish and the Portuguese and Australian Parties for the Animals a few years ago, I had exactly the same experience, really special. Ideas about the economic crisis, for example. The insight that the focus on economic growth is a problem and not a solution for the crisis we are facing, because of the fact that our planet can't cope with our endless hunger to get more things, to eat more meat, to use more energy, to earn more money. Ladies and gentlemen, during the TV broadcast of the election result in 2003, to everyone's surprise, the Party for the Animals scored higher than all the other new parties combined. We nearly got a seat within 2 months of campaigning with no budget. On the 22nd of November 2006, for the first time ever in the world, voters elected members of a Party for the Animals to a national parliament. And with nearly 3 seats, we achieved a victory. Our breakthrough gave a real drive to push even harder for our cause. And our tools vary, from participating in debates with secretaries of government departments, to asking parliamentary questions, to proposing measures through petitions the Parliament votes on, like a ban on enriched cage system for laying hens. And make no mistake, an enriched cage for laying hens is nothing more than a decorated battery cage. And battery cages, fortunately, are banned in the EU. We managed to get a larger budget for alternatives to animal experiments. As I've already said, the government has also provided a €6 million budget to stimulate the innovation of meat alternatives. And in January this year, we got the majority in Parliament for a governmental plan of action to work towards a new farming system in which dairy farmers will have to keep their calves, with their mothers for a few months. This was quite an unexpected outcome and has caused a lot of unrest and protests in the dairy sector. I had to talk to 200 very angry dairy farmers during a protest in front of our parliament. And last week it was quite intimidating. And there were women farmers, there were female farmers, and they said, this is a protest mothers against mothers, isn't it? Is it? But last week we obtained a total ban on all imports of trophies from exotic animals. Also the ones for personal use, which was still allowed and formed a loophole for illegal commercial trade. Besides the use of traditional political instruments, we use more activist-like methods. Political analysts and historians see this as a form of expressive politics, instead of the more traditional instrumental politics, which is more focused on compromises and to act within the political conventions and try to better the status quo, instead of questioning the current social and economic system. In 2007, we were just elected, one of the female ministers thought it appropriate at the installation of the new cabinet to pose for the cabinet's photo wearing fox fur around her neck. I decided to wear my own fox during the first debate in the lower house after the elections. And all the newspapers wrote about it, partly because making a statement like that in the rather formal lower house is simply not done. But the public loved it. And the minister sent me a letter that she liked my alternative, and I've never seen her with fur around her neck after that. In 2008, we asked our former Prime Minister, Balkenende, about an official dinner where our former Queen Beatrix served foie gras to her guests. And foie gras, as you probably know, is liver from force-fed ducks and geese. No politician had ever asked a question about such issues before, parliamentary questions, but we did. And the answer came very quick. The Prime Minister apologized and said this would be a one-off mistake and it would never happen again. Ladies and gentlemen, we push other bigger political parties to start being more animal-friendly. For example, in 2006, our two socialist parties started an initiative to ban fur farms in our country, and this initiative got the majority of the votes 2 years ago. And my impression is that this is an immediate, in some way opportunistic, reaction to our existence as a party. Many environmental and animal organizations have to work hard to get their 5 minutes in the spotlights of politics by lobbying. It's really special that we have managed to get our foot in the door and that we will eventually be a permanent factor, even though we would rather not be needed there, of course. And by the way, at the beginning, most animal organizations feared that the party for the animals would be laughed at and meet an inglorious end. They believed that this would be detrimental to the struggle for animal rights. And they were also petrified that their lobbyists would be taken less seriously if the party failed in their purpose. In short, where we had expected to find support, we found instead unwillingness. So initially had to do without the financial and moral support of a number of important animal organizations. But fortunately, things are now changing. Increasingly more organizations are expressing their appreciation of the Party for the Animals and acknowledge the great opportunities that our initiative has to offer. An open door to the heart of the political arena. I have a personal tradition at our State of the Union Day of our King. All members of the Parliament, diplomats and ministers come together to listen to the address by our King. And the address is always written by the government. It's a day with fancy dresses, hats, very traditional, very posh. And behind me you see my statements of the last few years. The orange one is against the Free Trade Treaty, TTIP. Perhaps you know that. You know the TPP here in Australia, I think. Paul McCartney saw me with the chef's hat Meat-Free Mondays in 2008. And Meat-Free Mondays is his worldwide campaign. And I got a letter from him congratulating me, and he wanted to meet me. He thought it was a costumed ball of the Queen. And I met him, and I felt like a teenager backstage. I was so proud. And in 2014, he sent me a second letter wishing us all the best of luck for the European elections. And it's such a big honor to meet special people, also today, with the same ideals, I can assure you. My outfits generate a lot of free publicity for our cause, which is, of course, very positive. It's a great feeling to know that a lot of well-known opinion leaders and celebrities throughout the world support the idea of a Party for the Animals. Maneka Gandhi from India, for example, and the Dalai Lama said to the Dutch audience that he would vote for the Party for the Animals. But also Professor Tom Regan, who inspired the animal rights movement with his concept of giving rights to animals, or Professor Will Kimlicka, Ingrid Newkirk, president of PETA, Nobel Prize winner John M. Coetzee. They all became candidates on or official supporters of our party's list for the European elections. The great thing about having a Party for the Animals in Parliament, in our country at least, is that you get money from the state to found a political youth organization and a scientific bureau. And with this money, our scientific bureau, the Nicolaas G. Pearson Foundation, made the first Dutch climate documentary, Meat the Truth, in 2007, about the impact of meat consumption and production on climate change. And a year later, See the Truth, about our world fisheries. And the last documentary is One Single Planet, which premiered last year. And this film addresses the major sustainability issues that threaten our planet and offers potential solutions to preserve the livability of Earth for future generations. If you are interested, all the documentaries are in English and 11 other languages, and you can watch them online for free. Last week, my new book, The Canary in a Coal Mine, was published. And this book is based on One Single Planet documentary. And I had the opportunity to write it together with Ewald Engelen, a well-known Dutch economist. So also economists find their way to the Party for the Animals. We deliver a message that hasn't been heard before in politics. For example, if you were an environmentally friendly politician, you drove a Toyota Prius. But nowadays, it's becoming clear that being a vegetarian or vegan saves 50 more greenhouse gas emissions than switching to a Prius. Best is to do both, or to buy a bicycle, of course. We approach world problems such as the climate change from a different perspective, together with the animal rights issue, and it works. One of our biggest successes is the adoption by the lower house of our bill to implement a ban on the ritual slaughter without stunning in June 2011. It became clear that the majority of the House believes that avoidable suffering of animals can no longer be justified on the basis of traditions or religion. And when we started all the preparations needed for this initiative, there wasn't a majority in Parliament at all. People said to us that we didn't have a chance. We used scientific reports about animal suffering, made a documentary with footage of slaughter practices without stunning, and organized a hearing with scientists and religious groups to get this topic on the agenda. And the lobby coming from religious groups was heavy, but so was the pressure from the public and numerous religious people saying that the Torah and the Quran demand to respect animals. And while we were debating about ritual slaughter without stunning, members of Parliament against a ban on this practice, most of them of the conservative parties who had reversed all animal welfare issues and animal welfare standards in 2002, started to question me about all other kinds of animal suffering, such as the killing of lobsters in hot water, the quality of animal life in stalls, etc. And why didn't I focus on these issues instead of religious slaughter without stunning? I replied that it was heartwarming to see such concern for the well-being of other animals used by people, and that I would love to work with them to end this kind of suffering as well. But that wasn't not the answer they wanted to hear. Unfortunately, our Senate blocked the bill due to heavy lobby. And people in our country were really upset about this because the majority of the Dutch is in favor of a ban. And we'll try to get a ban later this year. Within the possibilities of a party of 2 seats in Parliament, which has only been in office for 9 years, I can safely say that we have achieved a lot. We get more publicity per seat than any other party. Our proposals are being adopted, and we are being discovered by animal protectionists all over the world. And we're rising in the polls. We could get 4 or 5 seats if there were to be national elections today. At the moment, we have 50 seats, 18 seats in regional parliaments, 15 seats in parliaments for water management, 1 seat in 12 city councils, 2 seats in the national parliament, 2 seats in the Senate, and 1 in the European Parliament. In Parliament, a lot of animal-unfriendly politicians are frustrated about the fact that our party managed to dominate any debate on livestock farming. One of our biggest opponents, the Christian Democratic Party, stated on national television that, to their irritation, since the Party for the Animals has been in Parliament, they have to talk about animals every day. And since 2006, during the debates on the agricultural budget, 80% of the speaking time of all parties in the Parliament is now taken up by animal rights and animal welfare issues. And the Minister of Agriculture stated that this had happened for the first time in history in 2007. More and more insiders acknowledge that they initially saw us as a passing phase, but they now see us as the new and a permanent factor to be reckoned with. The difference between an animal rights party instead of a lobby group is that other politicians see an animal rights party as a competitor and a threat to their seats, to lose votes. And the lobby group is just something you can ignore. And that's a huge factor for successful campaigning. I would like to take a brief look ahead. What's in store for our animal rights and our green movement? The way in which we have set up the economy has brought to some of us enormous wealth, but is now threatening to bring about great damage and destruction to our planet, people, and animals. And people come to realize that business as usual is no longer possible, it's no longer an option. There are companies and governments who think so, but it is not a coincidence that everywhere in the world there's a growing resistance coming from public society and individuals. And that means that all these concurrent crises can really be a turning point. Our way of life does not only harm animals and nature, but also threatens our health and that of future generations. And despite the financial crisis, during which many people had the tendency to think in terms of short-term personal interests, our party grew in the last elections by 45%, and we achieved the best election results in our history. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to conclude. I'm convinced that in order to change our way of life, to make it sustainable and led by principles of compassion, we have to shift our focus from being man-centered to being planet-centered. We are on the threshold of a new era. Our interactions with other living creatures must change, just as the way in which we interact with each other will also have to. This new era will not come to pass without a struggle. The established order, which has a vested interest in exploiting animals, will use all its powers to resist. And yet, just as the tobacco industry, apparently untouchable position of power, crumbled away as a result of changing social attitudes, so will progressive social insights into animal rights also ensure that animals are no longer the pariahs of this planet. I'm proud to be part of a movement that is the exponent of this new era. The time is ripe. Throughout the world, more and more parties for the animals are being set up. There are 14 parties for the animals at the moment, and the Portuguese party has seats in city councils and one in a national parliament. And of course, the Australian Animal Justice Party won a seat in New South Wales last year. And although it's quite a paradigm shift that we want to achieve, and although it is ambitious and hard work with a lot of counterforce, we are on our way. It reminds me of a great quote of Margaret Mead in the 40s. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. And she's so right. Think about other social movements that changed the world. Women's rights movement, abolishment of slavery, giving rights to children. It all started with just a few people. A lot of you are here because you care for our planet and all its inhabitants. You have the brains to change the world. You only need boldness, a non-conventional, independent way of thinking to be able to make a difference. To boldly go where no man has gone before. But that doesn't mean to go to planet Mars. It always seems impossible until it's done. And you say that I may say that I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. Thank you.